Joining us, Jamil Jaffer, former associate counsel to President George W. Bush, and Hagar Shamoli, a former spokesperson for the U.S. delegation to the United Nations during President Obama's administration. Jeremy, to you first. What happens to the government of Netanyahu if Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, these far-right members, quit his government?
Well, Jake, the Israeli prime minister has an 8-seat majority with his coalition government. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich together, they have 13 seats. And so if both of them choose to leave the government, Netanyahu's coalition could indeed collapse. If it does collapse, that means that elections will need to be held in order to replace, to choose a new Israeli prime minister. The prime minister has been offered a lifeline, however, by the opposition leader Yair Lapid, who said he would come in to provide a safety net, effectively, keeping the prime minister in power in order for this ceasefire deal to be implemented. Netanyahu doesn't seem keen to do that, to hand over the keys of declaring the next election to his one of his primary political opponents. And so this does put him in quite a pickle. And he has been backed into a corner in some ways by these political issues and also by the fact that he has faced tremendous pressure from the incoming president, Donald Trump, to go forward with this deal. Reneging now would be a major problem and probably not the way he wants to start off his tenure with the incoming American president. So the political wrangling is not over yet, Jake, but the Israeli government does appear to be moving forward with approving this deal. The Security Cabinet set to vote tomorrow. The full cabinet then will vote most likely on Saturday evening after Shabbat ends. That is raising some questions about exactly when this deal will be implemented. The Supreme Court still needs about 24 hours to hear petitions from those who would oppose the release of those Palestinian prisoners who'd be released in exchange for those 33 Israeli hostages. That process needs to happen before any exchange of hostages and prisoners happens. So questions about whether or not this deal will actually be implemented come Sunday. Jake?
Jamil, do you have any concerns about whether or not this vote is going to make its way through the Israeli Security Cabinet?
Well, it looks like it's going to get through. Obviously, we have these defections that might be taking place from the coalition, but it looks like the Yair Lapid offering his support for the deal. And, of course, there's a huge amount of pressure within Israeli society to get a deal done, to get these hostages back, and to slow the fighting and get to the ceasefire. So it looks like it's going to happen, but it may be a different coalition than we see today in government.
And Hagar, I don't want to sound too premature. We haven't even started phase one, much less gotten through phase one. But how difficult would it be to get to phase two of the deal? And what might it mean for Gaza?
Well, while I have a lot of hope for phase one and that it will stick, in particular because of the geopolitical dynamics, axis of resistance defeated, and Trump putting a lot of pressure on Netanyahu knowing that, phase 2 and 3 are going to be very difficult. And the reason is because Hamas has one goal, and that goal is to survive. But phase 2 and 3 don't allow for that. They don't allow for Hamas to have any control over Gaza or have any kind of arms or military capabilities. And so that's where things, I believe, are going to get very tenuous.
And Jeremy, walk us through what could happen on Sunday if all goes according to plan for phase one of the deal.
Yeah, Jake, if this deal is indeed implemented on Sunday, we will see a ceasefire go into effect. Last time we had a ceasefire in Gaza in late November 2023, we saw the ceasefire started in the morning. It wasn't until the evening that we actually saw the first hostages be released from Gaza by Hamas and prisoners from in Israeli jails being released into the West Bank. We know that last time we also saw this process take place via the Kerem Shalom crossing most of the days, with the Israeli hostages coming out through there, setting foot on Israeli soil for the first time via that way. And then, of course, there is the issue of humanitarian aid. We do expect that an influx of aid will begin going into Gaza on the first day of the ceasefire, ultimately ramping up to a goal of about 600 trucks of aid per day. But, Jake, we still have a few days until this deal is actually implemented, whether or not it starts on Sunday or perhaps slides into Monday. And what we know is that already the Israeli military is still continuing its assault on Gaza. We have seen over the course of the last 24 hours or so, 83 people have been killed in Gaza as these negotiations have been concluding. And so the real question, Jake, is how many more could potentially die before this deal actually goes into effect?
And Jamil, Donald Trump's obviously going to be president again on Monday, the inauguration day. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the incoming president's involvement was, quote, very important to the negotiations. How do you think Trump will handle phase two, if there is one?
Well, look, I think Trump has been clear about where he is on this, which is Hamas has got to be destroyed. He supports where Netanyahu is on this. I mean, after you think about what happened on October 7th, we're talking about the equivalent, Jake, of a dozen 9/11 attacks on a population-adjusted basis. And so Hamas has got to be taken down. That's got to be a minimum condition. Hagar is exactly right. That's going to be something that's going to be a problem for Hamas because they want to continue to exist, and that's their priority. And so the question is, how does that tension get resolved? I think President Trump will keep pressure up on Hamas and will support the Netanyahu government going forward.
Hagar, what do you think?
Well, first, I mean, I agree with Jamil. One of the things that that is really needs to be understood here is that you have so many factors in play. And by the way, even when I was in government during the Israeli-Palestinian peace process under President Obama, and in general, when you have ceasefire negotiations, they are always tenuous, but they are especially tenuous with a terrorist organization and one like Hamas that never negotiates in good faith. You can't believe a word they're going to say. And they have their own goals. And what's important about their goals right now is that they have all of their backers right now on the defense. Iran is on the defense. Hezbollah's decapitated. Now, President Assad has flown like a coward from Syria and gone to Moscow. And so without its backers, Hamas cannot exist. And it's going to grasp at every straw it can to stay in power. So when you've got that mixed with the domestic policies and issues you have in Israel, and Netanyahu, he should know better than to derail this whole thing for a handful of guys on his cabinet. But still, he's got his own personal interests and he wants to stay in power. You're talking about a mix of things that could derail anything when you're talking about moving into phase two in particular.
And Hagar, while I have you, your former employer, the United Nations, is warning that criminal gangs could impact the trucks delivering this much-needed aid to Gaza once the ceasefire goes into effect. You share that concern. What else do you think is crucial to make sure the aid flows the way it is intended?
Sure. Well, unfortunately, over the last 15 months, when you have a situation that's completely devolved into lawlessness, at first you had Hamas skimming the top of this aid or stealing this aid and selling it. But then when you have this lawlessness like this, gangs have arisen everywhere. And you risk their lives just to try to get this aid. The only way to get it safely to everybody is to have numerous NGOs and the UN get in there and hand deliver it themselves.
And Jamil, what happens if Netanyahu's government collapses? What then?
Well, that is the million-dollar question, right? I think what you'll see is Hamas get more aggressive. I think they'll push back. I think they'll restart as much of the conflict as they can. Whatever weapons they have, they'll start dumping them in. Hezbollah will do the same. The Netanyahu government has been fairly successful in this conflict, maybe not internationally, but at least domestically and with respect to taking out Hamas. I think what you'll see if the government falls, a real challenge both in Israeli society and with the ongoing conflict.
All right. Thanks to all. Appreciate it.